you know, let's try, alright, 10 samples to test the accuracy of a sensor is not enough when you're dealing with 3 different sensors. 10 is a very small number of samples in the context of statistics, which means that the confidence interval that we're going to have on how accurate is this sensor, what fluid height is it going to give us from one time to another, is going to be enormous. Which means that the statistical significance of the differences that we found is really, really low. The radar is much more accurate than the scale is much less accurate. And how do we know that unless we do 1,000 tests? And then we can say, okay, look, it's always very confined to this range, whereas this sensor is always very confined to this range. I think that the numbers that we came up with were not conclusive with regard to that. There were also a lot of economic and safety concerns that we did not take into account in this project. At 10 batches per day. Remember that each batch only takes 15 minutes, but for something like this, in order to start up and shut down the equipment, you're going to have to clean it out, inspect it to make sure all the pipes are clear, and refill the liquid, and close it up, and make sure all the valves are adjusted properly, and that requires somebody to be working there, a technician, who's going to have to be salaried, and that could take more than 15 minutes for each startup and shutdown. So each startup and shutdown could take, could extend the batch process from 15 minutes to maybe an hour, and at 10 of those a day, you're going to have somebody that's only working there for 10 hours a day, rather than 15 times 10, which is what, 2.5 hours a day? That could easily cost more than the silver or the copper over the course of a year if you have to salary people and train them to perform those tests. The outlet valve is kept open, presumably to prevent overflow. That's a safety consideration, because we can't have the height of fluid going over 4 foot 10 inches, which is fantastic, except that if we have an emergency shutdown, which means, okay, let's say there's a situation in the tank where the height of the fluid is going too high. Then we've got to shut the whole thing down. We've got to let all that trichloroethylene run out of the tank, which means all those tubes that we did in that batch did not have the correct amount of silver deposited onto them, which means they all have to be scrapped or they have to be recycled. Either way, it's going to be very expensive. After an emergency shutdown such as that, we're going to have to re-inspect all the equipment, decide why did the equipment go bad. We're going to have to scrap all that silver and all that copper, and we're going to have to pay engineers to come and analyze what went wrong. It's going to be very expensive, and we didn't account for any of that in our economic analysis. Trichloroethylene also is an environmental hazard. Not only is this an expensive chemical, but it's expensive to get rid of. Once we've dispensed the trichloroethylene, what do we do with it? We could recycle it into like a polymer, but that requires an extraordinary investment of not just money, but then we have to build our own plant unless we want to ship it off to someone else. We could pay off government officials to let us dump it into the river, but, then what happens if we get sued, and then we're facing billions of dollars in reparations possibly, mutant fish and stuff. So, serious business. That's what companies do. They have to balance the effects of doing this legally versus illegally. So, factoring all these things in, we came up with an economic analysis that even though silver itself would cost us around $1.6 or $1.7 million a year, factoring in all these concerns, the actual cost of this project a year would be about $5 million a year. And in order to turn a profit on that means we would have to sell each cube at $7.13 or more per cube. And who do you know is going to buy a silver-plated copper cube for $7.13? My recommendation to management is to scrap this project and do something that people are actually going to buy.